Hello, this is Douglas McGregor, Chief Executive Officer for Our Country, Our Choice. We have another exceptional guest today to talk about a range of things potentially, but we're going to focus a lot on COVID, we hope, and the experience we had with COVID. And this is Professor Francis Boyle. And he has a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from the University of Chicago, went on to Harvard Law School, and beyond that, earned a PhD. And as he was telling me before this program began, he went through the same PhD program at Harvard that Henry Kissinger experienced. Perhaps he'll tell us why he chose the Kissinger path in particular. He then occupied Kissinger's office at Harvard, which is even more interesting. But I think you'll find that the ghost of Kissinger did not have much impact on Professor Boyle. If anything, it strengthened his conviction that the truth must be told come hell or high water. And this is a man of extraordinary integrity. If I were going to pick one word to describe Professor Boyle, I think the word would be absolute integrity. So, Professor Boyle, welcome. You've got a big audience out there. We have almost 250,000 members, and we're growing by leaps and bounds every week. And we wanted to talk to you, as I said before, about COVID, but there are a range of topics that we can touch on. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background, particularly things that I did not cover in the introduction?
Well, Colonel, thank you very much for having me on. My best to your viewing audience, and thank you very much for those kind and gracious words of introduction. I think for the purpose of our conversation tonight about the whole COVID disaster is the fact that in 1985, I called for and then drafted the United States domestic implementing legislation for the Biological Weapons Convention that was known and is still known on the books today as the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989, that was passed unanimously by both houses of the United States Congress and signed into law by President George Bush Sr. with the approval of the United States Department of Justice. So that's how long I've been working against biological weapons, biological warfare, and my expertise in this particular area, Colonel.
Well, the implication is obvious. This act that was passed in 1989 talks specifically about biological warfare and terrorism. Is that something that we're dealing with the COVID vaccination?
Yes, Colonel, both with the COVID-19 itself. I was the first person on January 24, 2000 to publicly point out that COVID-19 was an offensive biological warfare weapon with gain-of-function properties, making it existentially dangerous, that had leaked out of the Wuhan BSL-4 in China. And that Wuhan BSL-4 in China is China's Fort Detrick. Later on, I pointed out that the COVID-19 was also developed at the University of North Carolina BSL-3 by Ralph Barrick, working with the Chinese bat queen from the Wuhan BSL-4. In addition, involved there at the UNC BSL-3 was Fort Detrick itself. Also, to get to your point on the vaccines, Colonel, the Food and Drug Administration was involved in the development of COVID-19, the offensive biological warfare weapon. And today, as we speak, Colonel, it has been the Food and Drug Administration that has approved all these COVID-19 vaccines. So they helped develop the weapon, and now they are approving these so-called vaccines. As for the vaccines themselves, I don't I'm not part of any anti-vax movement. I call them Frankenshots. To distinguish them, there are some legitimate vaccines out there, but I call these things Frankenshots. Uh, it was the Pentagon Defense Advanced Research Program Agency that envisioned and funded this mRNA technology that is behind all these Frankenshots. So they have us coming and going, Colonel. These mRNA, they give you particles of COVID-19 that get injected into your body. They are injecting into your body particles of an offensive biological warfare weapon with gain of function properties being injected into your body. And that is why we're seeing so many excess deaths, adverse events, and things of this nature, Colonel.
Well, the interesting part of this is that when this first was introduced as a vaccine, I was never vaccinated. No one in my family was vaccinated. We chose to avoid it, which was not easy. As you know, the pressure being brought against individual citizens to be vaccinated was enormous. But the reason we decided not to be vaccinated was simply because we thought the whole thing was a rush job, that it was so quickly introduced. We couldn't believe that effective trials had been held and that we really understood the unanticipated consequences of using this vaccine. Now, what you're saying is even more disturbing because its origins suggest that people that administered this vaccine or created it, then administered it to the public, actually did know how potentially damaging it could be. Is that right?
That is correct. And Colonel, you are right here. It also violated the Nuremberg Code on medical experimentation, going back to the United States prosecution of Nazi doctors at Nuremberg in the medical doctor's case. Yes. I said from the beginning of and I'm not here to toot my own horn, I said from the beginning that even if pharma developed a vaccine here, this vaccine would be more dangerous than useless. And I said that on my personal experience, Colonel, having helped defend Captain Dr. Yolanda Hewitt Vaughn, medical doctor who during Bush Sr.'s war against Iraq refused to give the experimental medical vaccines for the biological warfare agents anthrax and botulinum. Because of my expertise in this area, I was asked to help defend her, and I agreed to do so free of charge. I think that was February of 1991. And during the course of her court-martial, we fully established that those vaccines, Frankenshots, violated the Nuremberg Code on medical experimentation. And we thoroughly argued this, press conferences. I won't go through it all here. But as we found out, those Frankenshots, the original Frankenshots, cause the Gulf War sickness of these are just ballpark figures, Colonel, as I'm sure you know. Of the 500,000 U.S. military personnel who were forcibly inoculated, it turns out that 11,000 died and 100,000 were disabled. And those are lowball figures because the Pentagon still lies about that catastrophe because they know they inflicted a Nuremberg crime on our own troops. So I knew from that experience that this, whatever pharma rolled out here on COVID, was going to be a disaster. And that's why I said these vaccines would be more dangerous than useless. And I said right from the beginning that the figures from the anthrax botulin in 1991 would be a floor and not a ceiling for the disaster we are going to see here. I also pointed out that those figures, they inoculate young men and women in our armed forces who were in pretty good physical shape. We were not talking about old people, sick people, infirm people, and everyone else. And I thought this was going to be a catastrophe. In any event, the Gulf War sickness was a catastrophe. I still hear occasionally from veterans of this asking me for advice on how to get proper treatment because they don't get it at VA hospitals.
No, I have personal experience with this because I of course was in the desert at the time, and we were the lead element. We were the vanguard, if you will, of the 7th Corps, the first unit to go into Iraq in 1991. And my squadron, we frankly were the first element in the country, went further, faster than anybody else. And so there was enormous pressure brought to bear on us to take the vaccine. However, it's very interesting. In my case, I looked at it, and then someone handed me a roster and said, if you're going to take this, you have to sign this release. I said, release? What's that? They said it releases the government from any culpability or involved with taking the vaccine. I said, well, that's ridiculous. I've spent most of my adult life in uniform, and I have been vaccinated in the past, and there was never any release form required. So I said, forget it. I'm not going to take it. And frankly, at the time, I didn't think we were ever going to see any anthrax anyway, simply because we were out in an open desert. And, you have lots of wind and sand in the desert, tends to destroy chemical agents rather quickly. So the notion that they were going to have an impact on us, I thought was ridiculous. Plus, we were a mobile armored formation. We weren't going to sit still and be subjected to chemical attacks. So I said no. And I think most of the soldiers, they came to me and said, what do you think we should do, sir? I said, well, has the Army ever asked you to sign a release before you received a vaccination? They said, no, sir. I said, well, then why are they doing it now? Well, sir, I don't know. I said, well, my view is I'm not going to take it. And I certainly don't advise you to do it either. But the bad news is in many other units, the commanders actually punished their soldiers for not taking the vaccine. And you're spot on about the Gulf War syndrome, because we had people that became extremely ill and some died as a result. One, I think he's still alive, but permanently disabled. And these were completely normal, healthy human beings. So I did not think of that, obviously, when I was asked to take this vaccine. I went in for a sinus infection, which I develop about every 18 months. And I asked for the usual antibiotic to deal with it. And they said, sure, fine. And they said, by the way, would you mind if we tested you for COVID? I said, sure, go ahead. So 24 hours later, I was feeling infinitely better. And suddenly the phone rings and said, this is so-and-so at the clinic. How are you feeling? I said, oh, I feel great. Thanks so much for the antibiotic. Said, well, it turns out you have COVID. And I said, okay. Well, do you want to come in and have treatment and everything else? They said, no. Do you want to come in and get a vaccine? I said, no. They said, well, if your family comes down with this, and they probably will, we've got everything here, so please come in. We can handle it all. Well, my mother-in-law, who at the time was 86 or 87, she never went in to get a vaccine, and after 2 days, it was gone. It was like a mild flu, and the same thing was true for everybody else. Of course, we're a pretty healthy bunch. We don't drink or smoke. That helps. But, the bottom line is I never connected the Gulf War syndrome experience with what you're describing. But my God, I think you're right. It is absolutely unassailable. There is a connection. And the same rigidity of mind that drove people to tell their soldiers to get this vaccine and punish them if they didn't was also present with this COVID business. I don't know how we ever ended up being so Soviet-like in our approach to everything. It's very un-American in my judgment.
Right. That's why I wrote my book, Resisting Medical Tyranny.
Yes.
That is exactly what we saw here. Totalitarian measures coming out from the highest level government officials of the United States government, both political, medical, scientific, and working their way all the way down to your primary care physician who, these primary care physicians should have known better because of the Nuremberg Code on Medical Experimentation. For the reasons you indicated, Colonel, these clearly failed.
Yes.
It was obvious to me because of the work I had done against those two anti-biological warfare vaccines in 1991. And to me, COVID-19 was also a biological warfare weapon. We had never, in the history of this country, ever effectively developed any type of safe and effective vaccine for biological warfare weapons. And the one time we tried was the Gulf War sickness. And this is a catastrophe for our military personnel.
Can I switch to a topic that's related but distant? Can you talk to us a little bit about this Professor Charles Lieber, who was arrested for attempting to smuggle virus vials into China? And give us some background. Explain the importance of this event.
Yes, I don't mean to toot my own horn here, Colonel, but I spent 7 years at Harvard. I have 3 degrees from Harvard. I spent 2 years teaching at Harvard and 2 years at their Center for International Affairs. So I know all about Harvard. And Lieber, chair of their chemistry department, is an expert in nanotechnology, how to make particles extremely small. It's a matter of public record. He worked with Fort Detrick, obviously, to develop biological warfare weapons by means of nanotechnology. I'm sure Harvard knew all about that. You don't have the chair of your chemistry department off working with Fort Detrick unless you know exactly what's going on. And it does appear that Lieber was over there in Wuhan with his own lab, being paid by the Chinese Communist government. Harvard is trying to pretend they didn't know what was going on. I can assure you Harvard knew exactly what was going on over there. And as far as I could tell, he probably gave the technology necessary for nanotechnology. The Wuhan BSL-4 bragged on their website, maybe it's down by now, but I did review this, that they had applied nanotechnology to viruses. I repeat that. They applied nanotechnology to viruses. And COVID-19 has been nanotechnologized. There's, if you look at the size, it's so small. COVID-19 floats on the air, in the air, above the air. One scientist said it can float up to 29 feet in its lab, in that scientist's lab, I think it was MIT. Another scientist at Cornell said 21 feet. You'll note at the beginning of all this, Fauci and the rest of them denied aerial transmission. But of course, airborne transmission is a tell-all sign of a biological warfare weapon. That's how you deliver it, right, Colonel? You deliver it by air to human beings to breathe. And that's exactly what has gone on here with COVID-19. And it does seem to me Lieber had a role to play in that.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine how people could have done the things that they did. So if we reach the inevitable conclusion that the COVID-19 vaccine is effectively a biological weapon, biological warfare weapon or instrument, what kinds of things does it cause and what can be done to undo it? Is there anything we can do for the people that have been vaccinated that are suffering? or for those that haven't suffered yet, but may in the future?
Well, Doctor, I have a good friend, Dr. Merle Nass. I've worked with her for many years, going back to our stint with the Council for Responsible Genetics that was set up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Had some of the top life scientists from Harvard, MIT, and elsewhere. And she does have a web page, Merle Nass, Nass, on how to deal with the adverse effects of COVID-19. Dr. Nass was also involved in efforts to remedy the Gulf War sickness. So I'm not a medical doctor myself, but I would refer you to the webpage of Dr. Nass. She's also argued from the beginning that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine did work, and because of that, they revoked her medical license there in Maine in a total kangaroo court proceeding. Again, she reminds me of my defense of Captain Dr. Yolanda Hewitt Vaughn. Dr. Hewitt Vaughn was a real prophet in pointing out how dangerous these anthrax and botulinum vaccines were going to be. And as a matter of fact, to get back to your point, Colonel, the reason why the Pentagon mandated those two vaccines was they knew that the Reagan administration had authorized 40 different shipments of offensive biological warfare agents by the CDC. Think about that. CDC up to its eyeballs in biological warfare. Okay. And the American Type Culture Collection, which was supposed to be a scientific institute. 40 shipments of offensive biological warfare weapons agents to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, in the hope and expectation that he would weaponize them and use them against Iran. That is, the Pentagon, Cheney, knew what they had done. And it is for that reason that they said, well, maybe one way we could counteract that is to force all our troops to have these experimental vaccines, even in violation of the Nuremberg Code on medical experimentation.
So effectively, they experimented on us.
Yes. They treated you like guinea pigs, right? And remember, the CDC was involved in this. So notice the CDC today is up to its eyeballs in offensive biological warfare weapon, and they're the ones giving these advice to the American people on how to deal with COVID-19 and pushing the vaccines. And the same is true for the FDA. They're the ones approving the vaccines when they were involved in developing the COVID-19 at the UNC BSL-3, Colonel.
Well, this explains to a large extent this anecdote that came to me from someone in a laboratory who overheard two lab rats talking. And one lab rat said to the other, are you going to get this new vaccine that's out? And the lab rat looked at him and said, no, I think I'll wait for the human trials first. That's pretty bad, but I think that's where we are right now.
Well, Colonel, let me interrupt. This is exactly what they did in Israel. Okay.
Really?
In Israel, they literally, I've worked with lawyers in Israel about this. I've given interviews. They forced the entire population over there to take these mRNA Frankenshots. And they literally were used as lab rats over there in Israel. Right.
Well, we know that we've established biological laboratories in Ukraine. This is something that was eventually revealed to the American public, but since the revelation, there's been very little reporting on it. My impression is the Russians have captured some of these and destroyed as many as possible. Can you tell us anything about those laboratories? Is this an extension of the same mentality to foreign soil? And are we dealing with something like this in other countries where we've established labs?
Yes, Colonel. These I've reviewed. Obviously, I don't read Russian, but I did review what the Russians did expose. And my review is that, yes, these laboratories, understand, these laboratories were set up by the Pentagon. The Pentagon, you were in the Pentagon, these are not Mother Teresa and the Sisters of Charity here.
Really? I always thought, I'm shocked that you would suggest that.
Well, these are biological warfare weapons labs. They were using the Ukrainians over there as guinea pigs, and they were circling the Russia with these labs. Yes, I think that's correct. And we have similar labs out there in Asia around China. Yeah.
Well, the biggest problem we have in Washington is the absence of accountability. And where there is no accountability, there is also no performance. And the outcome is a series of rogue organizations. And I think what you're talking about are rogue organizations, but these organizations would not operate independently. They would not reach these conclusions on their own. There has to be a guiding hand, a central authority. Is this entirely due to the pharmaceutical industries and the enormous profits that they stand to make from these things? Or is there something else that we don't know about? Something else in the intelligence field? I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. I'm an average American who wants to understand how we could become involved in these things, given our history and knowledge of what's gone on in the past. Why would we do this? Maybe you can help us out a little bit.
Well, it's a combination of two things. First, pharma wants to make a killing off of all of us, right? And they are. But second, Colonel, you have to look at the long history of the United States government's involvement in biological warfare. This goes back to the Second World War. President Roosevelt had information, intelligence to believe that the Nazis were developing biological warfare weapons, which they were. And so, as he did with atomic weapons, he decided to set up our own program. He asked George Merck of the Merck Pharmaceutical Company to do this. And we proceeded to set up our own offensive biological warfare weapon program. Actually, it turned out to be an industry. If you're interested, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author Seymour Martin Hersh exposed all this in a book published about 1968 or 69. And everyone was bought off. Professors, academics, universities, medical schools, you name it. There was so much money involved, they were all bought off. Now, the difference is that this was before the biological warfare, the Biological Weapons Convention, and there was nothing illegal about it. It was clearly reprehensible. I mean, we're dealing here with Nazi-type weapons, Doctor. And actually, after the Second World War, we did incorporate some of these Nazi scientists into our own program. And likewise, in Asia, Japan, Imperial Japan, had a very extensive biological warfare weapons program that they used against the Chinese. And we gave them a get-out-of-jail-free card that if they cooperated with us and gave us everything, we wouldn't prosecute them. So we incorporated the Japanese Nazi weapons into our own program, too. So this was long-standing. Now, we had thought when the U.S. government became a party to the Biological Weapons Convention in 1974, in theory, we were supposed to wind it down. Indeed, Nixon gave an order to terminate it. And as far as I can tell, the Department of Defense and the CIA paid no attention at all to that order. The CIA was involved in it too. They just took all these weapons and work underground and continued with the program. So you have these two key power ministries of the United States government, the Department of Defense and the CIA, also the Department of Agriculture. Going back to the beginning of the program, there was a division of labor that offensive biological warfare weapons against plants and animals would be handled by the Department of Agriculture. Human beings, that would pretty much be the CIA and the.
Well, inevitably, we also, having sat through many discussions along these lines when I was on active duty, inevitably what happens is that someone produces a threat picture, and the Soviets are doing X, Y, and Z. Because they're doing X, Y, and Z, we are compelled to counter them. Of course, you never really know if what you're being told about the Soviets is accurate. There's no way for you to establish the certainty of what the opposition is doing, but that drives much of the thinking and drives the behavior. But I think it's very important what you pointed out with Nixon, because when I was last in government, I saw a lot of evidence for the same cavalier attitude towards a whole range of things inside federal agencies, but specifically the Department of Defense and the intelligence services, where regardless of what the president said or directed, things tended on the whole to go forward pretty much as they were, whether they liked it or not. That's back to this issue of accountability. If no one is ever held accountable for this sort of breach of law, and that's what it is, if you fail to follow the orders of the chief executive, you're breaking the law. If that is never punished in a demonstrable way, no one is made to pay a price, then this continues and continues and continues. And right now, I don't see any evidence that the people involved in the COVID-19 disaster are ever going to be brought to justice and punished either. Am I wrong?
Well, Colonel, let me put it this way. Because the Department of Justice is in the tank with the rest of the federal government, I have started a campaign to get everyone involved here indicted on a state and local basis for murder and conspiracy to commit murder. You can read my book, Resisting Medical Tyranny.
Yeah.
And I have worked with the people down there in Florida on this. I had a 45-minute meeting with the then Attorney General of Louisiana, now the Governor, Landry, a lawyer, smart guy. I went through his homicide statute with him, line by line, and he agreed with me that everyone involved here can be indicted for murder and conspiracy to commit murder, people living within his territorial jurisdiction. And that would involve two sets of indictments, one for the people involved in the development of COVID-19 at that UNC BSL-3, and then the second for the people involved in the development and marketing and administration of the Frankenshots. Landry agreed with me on both sets of indictment. He said he would consider the matter. It was basically political. He also said he would discuss this with the Republican Attorney General's conference he was soon going to attend. And then I had a 35-minute conversation with the Deputy Attorney General of North Carolina. And I went through different homicide statutes. I was originally hired here to teach criminal law. I taught it for maybe 8 years before moving over into international human rights law. And I went through his homicide statute with respect to both sets of people developing COVID-19 and the Frankenshots, the president, chief executive officer, the chief scientific officers in these companies. And again, he agreed with me, yes, they could all be indicted for murder and conspiracy to commit murder under North Carolina law, and that this would be South Carolina. This was a political question. Now, as you know, down there in Florida, I've worked with a lot of people down there in Florida, the Collier County ordinance, the ban the jab people, whatever. Florida right now is the cutting edge on opposition across the board. And there, as you know, Governor DeSantis, he was behind me at Harvard Law School, cum laude graduate, obviously a sharp guy. He requested the Florida Supreme Court for an order to convene a grand jury. I read the request. I read the order by the Supreme Court to convene the grand jury. They have expanded jurisdiction to consider every matter we're discussing here today. They issued an interim report. I did read the interim report. It was good, but so far no indictments. So my personal opinion, Colonel, is that if we can get even one set of indictments here, say in Florida with that grand jury, hopefully this whole house of cards will collapse, and we can try to remedy the deleterious impact that COVID-19 and the Frankenshots have had on the American people and restore our health.
Well, as we were discussing before this program began, Governor DeSantis has taken a very important step by convening the grand jury to deal specifically with COVID-19. And I'm sure that you will be asked to testify, and your testimony would have an enormous impact. And it may lead to the very thing that you want. I mean, what else can we do at this stage but what we're doing? This is an uphill battle. You know that. The deck is always stacked against truth and justice, sadly. But this is an opportunity. So we hope that you'll be able to testify. I'm sure you'll be contacted. And on behalf of our country, our choice, I thank you for everything that you've shared with us today. And we would look forward to seeing you testify with that grand jury. And we wish you all the best. You're a man of an enormous integrity, but also great courage. This is not an easy thing to undertake in our republic, and things have gotten worse recently, as we know.
Well, Colonel, as I said, I based on my involvement in this, I think Florida today is the cutting edge here.
Right.
And I think that if you people in Florida can make progress, and you have made progress, but can crack the nut here, it's going to help the rest of the country.
Right.
That's
Absolutely.
my personal opinion.
No, we support that 100%,
Right.
which is why we very, very much want to hear your voice in support of this grand jury. And hopefully it will produce some indictments. Whether or not it goes forward beyond that is beside the point. The important piece is, as you point out, are the indictments. Well, again, Professor Boyle, thanks a million for everything. Our members, I think, will enjoy listening to you, and we'll have you back at some future point in time, particularly if we are successful with this grand jury.
All right. And
so 1,000 thanks,
Colonel,
best wishes, and we'll talk to you soon.
I did want to say, though, a few words about the need to oppose the World Health Organization.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. Please, open fire on the World Health Organization.
It's all related. It's all part and parcel of the same thing here. It's the same forces behind the COVID pandemic who are now behind the World Health Organization treaty and these proposed regulations. And these orders, you've also seen not only the deleterious advice coming out from the CDC and the FDA, but the WHO too. They're all in on this together. And I have read the WHO treaty and the WHO regulations that will be considered in May at the World Health Assembly. And let me say this, I've studied international organizations since I was a law student at Harvard with the world's leading expert on this subject. And then I spent a year teaching that subject at Harvard and several years teaching it here. And in my own scholarly work, I've studied every international organization going back to the 1899 Hague Peace Conference. You can read my book, Foundations of World Order. And in all that study, this is the first time ever that I have read of a draft plan to create a totalitarian medical police state for the entire world. The United Nations is not that. It was never set up that way. It can't function that way. But this WHO treaty and health regulations have been deliberately designed by lawyers who have as much competence as I do to set up a totalitarian worldwide police state so that the orders will be coming directly out of the WHO and transmitted all the way down the line to your personal physician, who will be compelled to do whatever the WHO tells him or her to do. It'll be even worse than the Frankenshots during the COVID pandemic. And we all know the WHO is a front organization, all right, for big pharma, for the Chinese Communist government, for Bill Gates, and the biowarfare industry. What happened here, Colonel, is because of the grassroots opposition to what was coming out of the federal government on these totalitarian measures dealing with COVID-19 and the Frankenshots, the Biden administration decided to go over to the WHO and set it up there to circumvent our constitutional processes here in the United States, and to get a treaty and or these regulations that they could then bring back here in the United States and enforce against our state and local elected officials like Governor DeSantis, your Attorney General, and against our public health officials by means of the Supremacy Clause of the United States of America, and saying, well, now we have a treaty and you must obey the treaty. Or now we have these health regulations that are an executive agreement, like a treaty. And now you at the state and local basis must obey the edicts coming out of the WHO. And this, Colonel, despite the fact that the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, this is what they're trying to circumvent here, Colonel. Let me...
Well, you'll be happy to know that our country, our choice, has taken a very strong position on this matter and urging everyone to contact their respective representatives to oppose this treaty. Right. And the biggest challenge that we have, of course, is to educate the members of Congress. Some are simply not interested. You always encounter that sort of thing, but there are many, many, many who really simply don't know what this is about.
The 10th Amendment, which they're trying to I won't go through all the Supreme Court cases and that here.
Yes.
The 10th Amendment clearly says powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, that deals with public health because under our Constitution, the 10th Amendment, public health is not a domain of the United States federal government. It is under the control of state and local authorities and the American people, as the 10th Amendment says. But the only way they can circumvent the 10th Amendment is by getting a treaty or this executive agreement, the health regulations. That's exactly what they are doing here. And this treaty and these health regulations will circumvent our own Constitution and will have a dictatorial police state coming straight out of Tedros, their WHO, acting as a front man for Bill Gates, the Chinese Communist government, and Big Pharma.
Well, you've beautifully summarized our position. We're utterly opposed to this treaty. We're doing everything we can through our membership to bring some pressure to bear on the Hill through representatives and senators to stand fast against this. But of course, we don't know where the money is coming from that inevitably shows up to support these kinds of things. That's our biggest challenge.
It's pharma. They have huge amounts of money, and they can hire some of the top lawyers in the country to put these documents together. But, Colonel, I would like to suggest there in Florida, you go even farther, that your General Assembly adopt a statute just saying that under no circumstances will Florida comply to any order coming out of or originating from the World Health Organization pursuant to this treaty or these regulations. And to go on record and say, we won't do it. We have a right. I work with Collier County on their ordinance, and it's good. We had to make a few compromises there, but nothing, I think, fatal. But I think we need the Florida General Assembly there to just go on record and make this statement.
Well, I'm confident that Governor DeSantis and his leadership can make that happen. It can happen in other states as well.
Right.
But it would be ideal if we could stop it at the center in Washington. We could make it abundantly clear at the federal level that this is something we do not want. And that requires education and persistence and pressure. And that's what we're about. That's what we're trying to achieve.
Congressman Biggs of Arizona, I've reviewed the different types of legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate. And the Biggs legislation is directly on point. It's the best one out there.
Yeah, Andy Biggs is one of our biggest fans, and we are his biggest fan as well. So you hit the right man. He definitely is on point on this. And again, he's one of these people that doesn't take the money. Right. That makes a big difference.
But I do think Florida, again, could make a big difference down here, and just have the state of Florida go on record and say we will not comply with anything originating out of the WHO, period.
Well, we will definitely be in touch with you for that very purpose with the current grand jury. Again, thank you for everything, taking time to talk to us, to educate us, to explain things, because I know I don't know enough, and I don't think our members on the whole know enough about this subject, which is why it's so important to have someone like you come and spend time with us. We thank you for everything that you've done, for your integrity and courage. We pay tribute to you. And again, we'll be in touch via the grand jury.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today and speak to the members of your audience. Yes.
Thanks, Professor Boyle.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Be in touch. Bye-bye.
Yeah.